They thought she was just the silent housewife. They thought her silence was weakness and her patience was submission. When Marcus Sterling brought his young, arrogant mistress, Jessica, to the most important family gala of the decade, he thought he was flaunting his power. He let his mistress humiliate his wife, Lindsay, in front of the city's elite, laughing as she spilled wine on her dress and mocked her upbringing. But Marcus forgot one crucial detail about the roof he was standing under. He forgot who signed the checks. He forgot who his father really trusted. And by the time the dessert was served, the Sterling family empire would have a new ruler, and it wouldn't be him. The chandeliers inside the Sterling manor didn't just sparkle, they judged. Or at least, that's how it felt to Lindsay Sterling as she adjusted the centerpieces on the long mahogany table for the 10th time that hour. This wasn't just a dinner party. It was the 70th birthday gala for Arthur Sterling, the patriarch of the Sterling shipping empire, and ostensibly, Lindsay's father-in-law. But to Lindsay, Arthur was more than an in-law. Over the last 5 years, while his health declined and his own son, Marcus, was off jet-setting across Europe, securing clients, Lindsay had been the one blending his smoothies, managing his appointments, and sitting by his bedside during the long, terrifying nights of his pneumonia recovery. Mrs. Sterling? Lindsay jumped slightly, turning to see Jenkins, the head butler who had been with the estate since before Marcus was born. His face was etched with a familiar, sympathetic concern. "Yes, Jenkins? Are the caterers set up in the West Wing?" Lindsay asked, smoothing down the fabric of her navy blue velvet gown. It was elegant, understated, and 3 years old. Marcus hadn't increased her allowance in months, claiming the company was optimizing assets. Yet she had seen the credit card bill for a diamond bracelet from Tiffany's just last week, a bracelet she was certainly not wearing. "The caterers are ready, madam," Jenkins said, his voice lowered. "But Mr. Sterling has arrived, and he isn't alone." Lindsay's stomach dropped. The cold dread that had been her constant companion for the last year tightened around her chest. "Is it a business associate, Jenkins?" Jenkins hesitated, his eyes darting away. "I believe associate would be the term he uses, madam, but she brought luggage." Lindsay felt the blood drain from her face. Luggage? Arthur's birthday gala was a weekend affair, true, but guests were staying at the Ritz in town. Only family stayed at the manor. "Thank you, Jenkins," she whispered, composing herself with a strength she didn't feel. "I'll handle it." She walked through the grand foyer, her heels clicking against the marble that she had personally supervised the polishing of yesterday. As she reached the double oak doors, they swung open. Marcus Sterling walked in, looking every bit the golden boy of the industry. He was handsome in a way that had stopped aging at 30, despite being 42. His tuxedo was bespoke, his hair perfectly coiffed, and his smile was dazzling. But that smile wasn't directed at his wife. It was directed at the woman clinging to his arm. She was young, perhaps 23. She wore a dress that was scandalous even for a nightclub, let alone a prestigious family gathering, a shimmering, backless red sequin number that screamed for attention. Her hair was blonde, extensions cascading down her back, and on her wrist sat the Tiffany diamond bracelet Lindsay had seen on the bill. "Marcus," Lindsay said, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. "You're early." Marcus looked up, his expression shifting from amusement to annoyance the moment he locked eyes with his wife. "Lindsay, stop hovering. I told you I'd be here." The woman, Jessica, popped her gum, looking Lindsay up and down with a sneer of undisguised contempt. "So this is the wife?" Jessica laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Marcus, baby, you said she was, plain, but you didn't tell me she dressed like a librarian at a funeral." Lindsay stiffened. "I am Lindsay Sterling, and this is my home. Who are you?" "I'm Jessica," the woman announced, stepping forward and invading Lindsay's personal space. She smelled of overpowering vanilla and expensive champagne. "And I'm Marcus's +1 for the weekend. He said I should come meet the old man, since, I'm practically family." Lindsay looked at Marcus, horror washing over her. "Marcus, you cannot be serious. It's your father's 70th birthday. The board of directors will be here. The press will be here." "Exactly," Marcus snapped, dropping his luggage. "Louis Vuitton, brand new, onto the floor for the staff to pick up." "It's a party, Lindsay," lighten up. Jessica is here to ensure I don't die of boredom while you talk about whatever it is you talk about. Recipes? Dust? I talk about the company, Marcus, Lindsay said quietly, since I'm the one who reads the briefs you throw in the trash. Marcus stepped in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that Jessica watched with a smirk. Don't you dare start with me, Lindsay, not this weekend. You are here to look presentable, make sure the soup is hot, and keep your mouth shut. Jessica is staying in the East Guest Suite. Make sure it has fresh lilies. She likes lilies. The East Guest Suite is next to our bedroom, Lindsay said, feeling like she might vomit. Correction, Marcus said, brushing past her. It's next to my bedroom. You can take the guest room down the hall. I need my rest. He walked away, Jessica trailing behind him. As she passed Lindsay, Jessica leaned in, her voice dripping with poison. Don't worry, sweetie. I'm not here to take your job, just your husband. Oh, wait. Looks like I already did. Jessica giggled and strutted away, leaving Lindsay standing alone in the grand foyer of the home she had maintained for 10 years, feeling smaller than a speck of dust. By 7 p.m., the Sterling Manor was buzzing. The elite of New York and London had descended upon the estate. Senators, shipping magnates, and old-money socialites filled the great hall, sipping vintage Pinot Noir and discussing mergers. Lindsay had retreated to the kitchen for 20 minutes to compose herself, splashing cold water on her face and reapplying her lipstick. She had to be perfect. For Arthur, this was his night. He had been frail lately, his heart condition worsening, and she refused to let Marcus's infidelity ruin the old man's milestone. When she re-entered the ballroom, she immediately scanned the crowd for Arthur. He hadn't come down from his study yet. His nurse said he was resting until the main toast. That was good. It bought her time, but it also left her exposed. Across the room, near the ice sculpture, Marcus was holding court. He was charming, loud, and drunk on his own ego. And right beside him, practically draped over his shoulder, was Jessica. The red dress was a beacon. Every eye in the room kept darting toward her, then back to Lindsay. The whispers were audible. Is that? Who is she? Look at Lindsay. Poor thing, does she know? Of course she knows. Look at the bracelet. Lindsay held her head high and began to circulate. She greeted Mrs. Vandermeer, the wife of the bank chairman. Lindsay, darling, Mrs. Vandermeer said, her eyes pitying. The floral arrangements are exquisite. You have such a touch. Thank you, Margaret, Lindsay smiled. I wanted everything to be perfect for Arthur. Speaking of perfect, Margaret lowered her voice. Who is the colorful young woman with Marcus? Is she a niece? Before Lindsay could answer, a high-pitched laugh cut through the conversation. Jessica had arrived at their circle, Marcus towing her along by the hand. Oh, look, it's the welcoming committee, Jessica slurred slightly. She was holding a large glass of red wine, tilting it dangerously. Marcus was just telling me how much this house is worth. Can you believe it? And to think you guys just live here. Hello, Marcus, Mrs. Vandermeer said icily. Margaret, Marcus boomed. Meet Jessica. She's an aspiring model. Very talented. Model/actress, Jessica corrected, looking at Mrs. Vandermeer's vintage pearls with a hungry expression. I'm going to be huge in L.A. next year. Marcus is helping me set up a portfolio. Lindsay stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation before Jessica insulted one of the most powerful women in the state. Marcus, perhaps Jessica would like to see the garden. The night-blooming jasmine is out. Jessica turned her gaze on Lindsay, her eyes narrowing. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory look. I don't like gardens. Dirt ruins my heels. These are Louboutins, honey. Marcus bought them for me in Paris last month. When was the last time you went to Paris? The room seemed to go silent. The surrounding guests stopped talking, their ears tuning into the drama. I haven't been to Paris in a while, Lindsay said calmly. I've been here, taking care of Arthur. Boring. Jessica sang out. She took a step closer to Lindsay. You know, Marcus tells me you're basically a glorified nurse. He says you have zero passion. That you're, what was the word, baby? Frigid? Marcus chuckled, taking a sip of his scotch. He didn't defend his wife. He enjoyed the show. Excuse me, Lindsay said, her voice turning to steel. This is not the place. "Oh, lighten up." Jessica threw her hands up theatrically. As she did, the large glass of Cabernet Sauvignon in her right hand slipped. It wasn't an accident. Lindsay saw the flick of the wrist. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of Lindsay's navy blue velvet gown. It soaked into the fabric instantly, looking like a dark, spreading wound. A few drops splattered onto Mrs. Vandermeer's shoes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Oops!" Jessica covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes dancing with malicious glee. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy. But, honestly, that dress was hideous anyway. I did you a favor. Now you have an excuse to go change into something less drab." Lindsay stood frozen. The cold wine seeped through to her skin. She looked at Marcus, begging him with her eyes to say something, to be a husband, to be a man. Marcus looked at the stain, then at Lindsay's shocked face. He let out a short, cruel laugh. "She's right, Lindsay," Marcus said, loud enough for the circle to hear. "You look like a wet dog. Go clean yourself up before Father comes down. You're embarrassing me." The humiliation was physical. It burned hotter than the shame. Lindsay felt tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of her. She looked at Jessica, who was smirking behind her wine glass, and then at Marcus, who had already turned his back to refill his drink. "I will go change," Lindsay said, her voice trembling with repressed rage. "But Marcus, remember this moment." Yeah, go scrub." Marcus waved a hand dismissively. As Lindsay turned and walked toward the grand staircase, the whispers exploded behind her. She walked with a straight back, but inside, something had fractured. She had spent 10 years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect hostess. She had protected Marcus's reputation, covered up his mistakes, and nursed his father. As she reached the top of the stairs, she looked back down. Jessica was now leaning against Marcus, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh uproariously, while pointing at the spot where Lindsay had just stood. Lindsay wiped a single tear from her cheek. She didn't go to her room to cry. She went to her private study, the one room Marcus never entered because he found paperwork boring. She opened the safe behind the painting of the original Sterling shipyard. Inside wasn't jewelry or cash. It was a thick leather binder containing the trust protocols and the medical power of attorney updates she had finalized with Arthur and the family lawyers 3 weeks ago. Marcus thought he owned the mansion. He thought he was the heir apparent. Lindsay ran her finger over the spine of the binder. "You want a show, Marcus," she whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you a show." Lindsay stood in her dressing room. The heavy oak door locked tight against the noise of the party downstairs. She peeled the ruined velvet dress off her body. Her skin was stained purple across the chest, looking like a bruise that had bloomed instantly. She walked into the bathroom and turned the faucet on cold. As she scrubbed the wine from her skin with a rough washcloth, the memories she had suppressed for years began to flood back. She remembered the day she met Marcus. He hadn't always been a monster. 10 years ago, he was the charming, slightly rebellious son of the shipping magnate, desperate to prove he was more than just a trust fund baby. Lindsay was a logistics manager at a rival firm, sharp, ambitious, and self-made. He had wooed her with persistence, not money, but the rot had set in slowly. It started when Arthur, his father, refused to hand over the CEO position 5 years ago. Arthur had seen something in Marcus, a reckless streak, a lack of discipline, that terrified him. Marcus took the rejection as a personal insult. He stopped working hard and started working the social scene. He started drinking. He started traveling. And Lindsay? She had stepped into the void Marcus left behind. She looked at herself in the vanity mirror. The woman staring back was tired, yes, but underneath the fatigue was the steel spine that had kept Sterling Shipping afloat during the liquidity crisis of 2022. Marcus didn't know about the late-night calls with the creditors. He didn't know she had sold her own inheritance, a small plot of land in Oregon, to cover a payroll error he had caused by gambling on a bad stock tip. "No more," she whispered to her reflection. She didn't put on a soft, apologetic dress. She walked into her closet and pulled out a garment she had bought for a charity gala she never attended. It was black silk, floor-length, with a sharp architectural neckline that looked less like clothing and more like armor. It was severe. It was powerful. She put on the diamond earrings Arthur had given her for her 5th anniversary, the ones Marcus had forgotten to buy, so Arthur had stepped in to save face. When Lindsay unlocked the door, she wasn't the humiliated wife anymore. She was the matriarch in waiting. As she descended the back servants' stairs to check on the kitchen before rejoining the party, she ran into George Henderson. George was Arthur's personal attorney and the only other person in the house who knew the full extent of the family's finances. He was a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a briefcase that never left his side. "Lindsay," George said, stopping in the narrow hallway. He looked at her, noting the change in dress and the cold fire in her eyes. "I saw what happened in the ballroom," Jenkins told me. "It's fine, George," Lindsay said, her voice clipped. "Just spilled milk. Or wine in this case." George stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Arthur is awake. He's in the library. He wants to come down for dinner, but he's worried about you. He knows Marcus brought that woman." "Let him come down," Lindsay said. "It's his birthday. He shouldn't hide in his own house." George hesitated. "Lindsay, regarding the documents we signed last month, are you sure you want to proceed tonight? It will be nuclear. There will be no going back for Marcus. He is, after all, his son." Lindsay looked at a painting on the wall, a portrait of Arthur's late wife, Catherine. She had built this house. She had planted the rose gardens. She wouldn't have let a woman like Jessica treat her like a servant. "Marcus made his choice when he walked through that door with her," Lindsay said softly. "He didn't just disrespect me, George. He disrespected this house. He disrespected his father. If we don't do this tonight, there won't be a company left in 6 months. Jessica is already talking about liquidating assets to fund a modeling career." George's eyes widened. "She said that?" Loud and clear. George straightened his tie, his demeanor hardening. "Then I will have the papers ready. I'll be seated at the main table." "Good." Lindsay took a breath. "It's time for dinner." The dining room of Sterling Manor was a masterpiece of old-world wealth. A long table set for 20 guests stretched beneath a frescoed ceiling. The silverware was heavy, the crystal was Waterford, and the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. When Lindsay entered, the conversation lulled. The black dress was a statement. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a widow who had already buried her husband and was ready to collect the insurance. But the moment was ruined by a shrill giggle. "Oh, look, she's back!" Jessica shouted from the head of the table. Lindsay's steps faltered. The seating chart she had spent 3 days organizing had been decimated. Traditionally, Arthur sat at the head of the table. Marcus, as the son, sat to his right. Lindsay, as the wife of the son and the hostess, sat to Arthur's left. But Jessica was sitting in Lindsay's chair. She had physically moved the place cards. Lindsay's card, hand calligraphed, had been tossed down to the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, usually reserved for the most junior associate or distant cousin. Marcus was sitting in Arthur's chair at the head of the table, looking like a king on a throne he hadn't earned. "I hope you don't mind, Elena," Jessica said, mispronouncing her name on purpose. "Marcus and I just couldn't be separated. We're in that honeymoon phase, you know? And the view from here is much better. You looked a little lonely up here anyway." The guests, high-powered investors, board members, and old family friends, were staring at their plates, mortified. Mrs. Vandermeer looked ready to walk out. Lindsay walked slowly to the head of the table. She placed her hands on the back of the chair Jessica was occupying. "You are sitting in my seat," Lindsay said calmly. "And Marcus is sitting in his father's seat." "Father isn't here yet," Marcus snapped, pouring himself another glass of wine. He was flushed, his eyes glassy. "And frankly, at his age, he's lucky if he makes it down the stairs. Someone has to lead this family. Sit down, Lindsay. Don't make a scene twice in one night." "Yeah, go sit at the kids' table," Jessica smirked, biting into a breadstick. Lindsay looked at Marcus. For a second, she considered screaming. She considered flipping the table. But then she saw George Henderson at the middle of the table, giving her a microscopic nod. "Wait," the nod said. "Wait for the kill." Lindsay released the chair. She turned and walked the entire length of the long table, her heels clicking in the silence. She sat in the chair near the kitchen door, completely isolated from the power center of the table. "Excellent," Marcus boomed. "Now that the help is seated, let's eat. Jenkins, bring the soup." The first course was served in an agonizing tension. Marcus dominated the conversation, bragging loudly about a massive deal in Hong Kong. "I told the guys in Hong Kong, look, Sterling shipping is going modern," Marcus shouted, waving his spoon. "We're cutting the dead weight. We're automating. We're going to fire half the logistics team and outsource it to AI. It's going to save us millions." Lindsay stiffened. The logistics team were people she had hired. People with families. People who had been loyal for 20 years. Marcus, Mr. Thorne, a senior board member, spoke up cautiously. "The logistics team is the backbone of our quality control. If you cut them—" "Boring," Jessica interrupted. She slammed her hand on the table. "God, do you guys only talk about boats? Marcus, tell them about the yacht we're going to buy." "Oh, right," Marcus grinned. "We're looking at a 150-footer. Thinking of naming it the Jessica." A collective gasp went around the table. "Marcus," Mrs. Vandermeer said sharply, "you already have a yacht, the Lady Lindsay. Your father christened it 10 years ago." "It's old," Jessica said, waving a fork at Mrs. Vandermeer. "It smells like mildew and old people. We're selling it. Scrap metal." Lindsay gripped her napkin so hard, her knuckles turned white. The Lady Lindsay wasn't just a boat. It was where she and Marcus had spent their honeymoon, back when he loved her. Suddenly, the double doors at the far end of the room creaked open. The sound of a motorized wheelchair whirring filled the silence. Arthur Sterling entered the room. He looked frail. His skin was papery, and he was wrapped in a thick wool blanket despite the heat of the room. He was hooked up to a small portable oxygen tank, but his eyes, blue and piercing, were sharp as razor blades. He was pushed by his private nurse, but he signaled for her to stop just inside the door, right next to where Lindsay was sitting in her exile. "Father!" Marcus stood up, swaying slightly. "You made it! We were just keeping your seat warm." Marcus didn't move to vacate the head of the table. He stood there, expecting his father to be wheeled to a side spot. Arthur didn't look at Marcus. He looked down at Lindsay, sitting in the lowest seat at the table. He looked at her black dress, her dignity, and the place card that had been thrown there. Then, Arthur looked down the long table at Jessica, who was wiping her mouth and looking annoyed that the old man had interrupted her story. "Happy birthday, Arthur," Lindsay said softly, placing a hand on his trembling arm. Arthur covered her hand with his own. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you, my dear," Arthur rasped. His voice was weak, but it carried in the silent room. "Bring him up here, nurse," Marcus shouted. "Squeeze him in next to Jessica. She loves old people." Jessica suppressed a laugh. Arthur raised a hand. "No," he said. "I like this spot. I will sit here." "Down there?" Marcus laughed. "But that's the cheap seats, Dad. You're the birthday boy." "I will sit," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that had commanded fleets of ships for 40 years, "where the head of the family sits. And currently, the only person acting like family in this room is sitting right here." He gestured to Lindsay. Jenkins immediately rushed over, removing the empty chair next to Lindsay and positioning Arthur's wheelchair so he was side by side with her at the foot of the table. The dynamic of the room shifted instantly. The head of the table was no longer where Marcus sat. The power had migrated to the foot of the table. The board members and investors physically turned their chairs, ignoring Marcus and facing Arthur and Lindsay. Marcus's face turned red. He sat back down, realizing he was losing the room. "Fine," Marcus muttered. "Be dramatic. Jenkins, serve the main course." As the servers brought out the roast lamb, Jessica leaned over to Marcus, whispering loudly enough for half the table to hear. "He looks like a corpse, Marcus." "How long do we have to wait? I want to go to the club." Arthur heard it. Lindsay knew he heard it, because the vein in his temple throbbed. Arthur picked up his crystal goblet. He tapped it with a spoon. Ding, ding, ding. "I would like to say a few words," Arthur announced. "Oh, goody, a speech." Jessica groaned, rolling her eyes. "Quiet, Jessica," Marcus hissed, finally sensing the danger in the air. Arthur looked down the table, staring directly at his son. 70 years, Arthur began. "I built this company from a single tugboat. I built this house from the bricks of my father's failures. I always hoped. I always prayed that I would pass it on to my blood." Marcus puffed up his chest, buttoning his jacket. "And I'm ready, Dad. I've got big plans. Like I said, AI, automation." "I wasn't finished," Arthur snapped. The snap was so sudden and violent that Marcus actually flinched. "I have watched this company bleed for 5 years," Arthur continued, his breath rattling in his chest. "I have watched my accounts drain. I have watched my reputation suffer. And I stayed silent because I loved my son. I thought, he's just finding his footing. He'll grow up." Arthur's gaze shifted to Jessica, looking at her with a disgust so profound, she actually pulled her shawl tighter around herself. "But tonight," Arthur said, "I realized I don't have a son in this room. I have a leech." "Now hold on a second." Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "You can't talk to me like that in front of my guests. I am the CEO of Sterling Shipping." "Acting CEO," Arthur corrected calmly. "It's the same thing. You signed the papers when you got sick," Marcus yelled. "I run this show, and if you don't like it, you can take your nurse and go back to bed. Jessica and I are the future of this family. Lindsay is the past. You are the past." The room was deathly silent. This was it. The bridge was burned. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying, cold smile. "Jenkins," Arthur said softly, "bring me the projector remote." "Projector?" Marcus blinked. "What for? A slideshow of your childhood?" "No," Arthur said. "Mr. Henderson has prepared a short presentation regarding the ownership structure of the manor and the company. I think it's time we clarified who exactly owns the roof you're standing under, Marcus." Arthur pressed a button. A large screen descended from the ceiling behind Marcus's head. The projector whirred to life, and the first slide wasn't a legal document, it was a photograph. A grainy, black and white surveillance photograph, taken 3 days ago. It showed Marcus handing a briefcase to a man in a trench coat in a parking lot. "Let's talk about the Hong Kong deal, shall we?" Arthur asked, his voice ringing out like a judge delivering a death sentence. The image on the projector screen froze the room. It was grainy, high-contrast black and white, but unmistakable. It showed Marcus Sterling standing next to a gray sedan in a dimly lit parking lot, handing a thick leather briefcase to a man whose face was partially obscured by a hat. "That?" Marcus stammered, his face draining of color. He stood up so quickly his chair screeched against the parquet floor. "That is a private meeting! With a consultant! We were discussing sensitive HR matters, hence the privacy." "Is that so?" Arthur asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Because the man you are handing that briefcase to is Victor Volkov, a known corporate espionage broker who operates out of Macau." A ripple of shock went through the board members. Mr. Thorne dropped his fork. "Volkov? Marcus, surely not. He's on the Interpol watch list for industrial theft." "It's a lie!" Jessica shrieked, sensing the shift in the room. She stood up, her red dress shimmering aggressively. "Arthur is just senile. He's photoshopped it. Marcus is a genius businessman." "Sit down, child," Arthur commanded without looking at her. He pressed the remote again. The slide changed. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a bank statement. A massive, complex wire transfer routing number was highlighted in neon yellow. "This," Arthur narrated, "is the routing path for the Hong Kong deal you've been bragging about all night. You told the board you were merging with Red Star Logistics to expand our Asian market. You claimed you needed $12 million of liquid capital from the company reserves to finalize the merger." Arthur looked at George Henderson, the lawyer. George, would you tell the room what Red Star Logistics actually is? George stood up, adjusting his glasses. He held a thin file in his hand. Red Star Logistics is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks ago. It has no ships. It has no employees. It has no office. Its sole director is listed as... George paused for effect, looking directly at Jessica. A. J. Miller. The room turned to look at Jessica. My last name is Miller, Jessica whispered, her eyes widening. Marcus set up a fake company in your name, Arthur said, his voice dripping with disappointment. He took $12 million of Sterling Shipping's operating capital, money meant for payroll, for maintenance, for the pensions of the men who work on our docks, and he funneled it into an offshore account controlled by you two. It's not stealing, Marcus shouted, sweat pouring down his forehead. It's a signing bonus for the new management team. I was going to pay it back once the stock went up. There is no stock, Mr. Thorne yelled, slamming his fist on the table. You embezzled $12 million? Marcus, that is a federal crime. I did it for us, Marcus screamed, gesturing wildly at the room. The company is dying. I needed a parachute. I needed capital to start my own venture. And yes, Jessica and I deserve it. We are the face of this brand. Lindsay, who had been sitting silently next to Arthur, finally spoke. She didn't shout. She didn't stand up. She simply reached for her water glass and took a sip. You aren't the face of the brand, Marcus, Lindsay said coolly. You're a liability. And that briefcase you gave Volkov? It didn't contain cash. It contained the client list, the master shipping routes, the confidential defense contracts we hold with the Navy. Marcus froze. He looked at Lindsay with genuine fear for the first time. How do you know that? Because, Lindsay said, locking eyes with him, I switched the files. The silence that followed was deafening. What? Marcus whispered. You left the briefcase in the study the night before you met Volkov, Lindsay explained, her voice steady. I saw the meeting on your calendar, marked gym. You never go to the gym on Tuesdays. So I checked the case. I found the classified documents. I replaced them with 300 pages of my old grandmother's biscuit recipes and some heavily redacted newspapers. A few nervous chuckles broke out among the guests. You sold Volkov a book of recipes, Lindsay continued. And when he realizes he paid you for flour and sugar instead of state secrets, he is going to be very, very unhappy with you. Marcus slumped back into his chair, defeated. The sheer magnitude of his failure was crashing down on him. He had committed treason against his company, embezzled millions, and been outsmarted by the wife he called boring. So, Arthur said, pressing the remote one last time to shut off the projector. The $12 million has been frozen by the bank thanks to George's quick work this morning. The merger is void. And as of 8 p.m. tonight, the board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO, effective immediately. You can't fire me, Marcus mumbled, clutching a napkin. I'm your son. I'm not firing my son, Arthur said sadly. I'm firing a thief. Jessica, realizing the money was gone, suddenly stood up. The look of adoration she had plastered on her face all evening vanished. Wait, so the money is frozen? The $12 million? Gone, George confirmed. And since your name is on the shell company, Miss Miller, I suggest you don't leave town. The FBI might have some questions for you. Jessica looked at Marcus with pure venom. You idiot! You told me it was a done deal. You told me we were rich. Jess, baby, I can fix this, Marcus pleaded, reaching for her hand. She slapped his hand away. Don't touch me! You promised me a life in Malibu! Now I'm going to jail because you're too stupid to check a briefcase? We still have this! Marcus stood up, desperation clawing at his throat. He looked around the grand dining room, at the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings, the sheer oppression of wealth that surrounded them. Fine! Take the company! I don't care! I hate the shipping business anyway. It's dirty, boring work. He grabbed a bottle of champagne and took a swig straight from the neck, foam spilling onto his tuxedo. But you can't kick me out of here, Marcus sneered, wiping his mouth. This is Sterling Manor. This is family property. And according to grandfather's will, the eldest male heir has residency rights for life. You can fire me, Dad, but you can't evict me. I'm staying right here, and Jessica is staying with me." He looked at Lindsay with a triumphant, manic grin. "So, wifey, looks like you're the one who has to leave. Get out of my house. I want you gone by morning. And take your dying old man with you." The audacity of the demand hung in the air like smoke. Marcus Sterling, stripped of his job, his reputation, and his dignity, was clinging to the last thing he had left: the mansion. Arthur looked at his son. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. He signaled to Jenkins to pour him a glass of water. "Marcus," Arthur said softly, "you really haven't paid attention to a single piece of paper in 10 years, have you?" "I know my rights," Marcus shouted, pacing behind the head of the table. "The Sterling Trust owns this house, and I am the beneficiary of the trust upon your incapacitation. And seeing as you're in a wheelchair and on oxygen, I'd say you're pretty incapacitated. I'm declaring power of attorney over the residence. Tonight." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Jenkins, call security! Escort Mrs. Sterling off the premises. She is trespassing." Jenkins, the loyal butler, stood completely still. He folded his hands behind his back and looked at the ceiling. "Jenkins, I gave you an order!" Marcus screamed. "I'm afraid I cannot follow that order, sir," Jenkins said politely, "because you are not the employer of the house staff. Nor are you the owner of the estate." "My father owns it," Marcus pointed at Arthur, "and I control him." Actually, George Henderson cleared his throat again. He opened the second half of his file. "Arthur doesn't own Sterling Manor either." Marcus froze. "What? Who owns it? The bank?" "No," George said. "The bank was going to foreclose on this property 7 years ago. You might remember. You had just lost $4 million in Las Vegas and drained the estate's maintenance fund to cover the debt. The bank called the note." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, so? Dad paid it off." "Arthur didn't have the liquidity," George corrected. "The company was in a slump. We were days away from an auction. The sign was going to go up on the lawn." "So what happened?" Jessica asked, her eyes darting between the men, trying to calculate if there was any value left to salvage. "A private investor stepped in," George said. "An investor who purchased the debt, paid off the mortgage in full, and assumed the title of the property. They bought the house, the grounds, the furniture, and the art collection. They own everything, down to the forks you are eating with." "Who?" Marcus demanded. "Who is it?" "Some Russian? I'll sue them." Arthur turned his wheelchair slightly. He looked up at Lindsay. Lindsay placed her napkin on the table. She stood up. This time, she didn't walk to the side. She walked to the head of the table, the spot Marcus had been guarding all night. She stood directly in front of him. She was shorter than him, but in that moment, she loomed like a giant. "I own it, Marcus," Lindsay said. Marcus blinked, a confused, lopsided smile forming on his face. "You? Don't make me laugh. You're a charity case. You came from nothing. Your dad was a mechanic." "Yes," Lindsay said, "and my mother's aunt was a land prospector in Oregon. When she died 8 years ago, she left me a very specific, very valuable plot of land. Timberland." Lindsay stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I sold it. I sold my family's legacy. I liquidated everything I had. And I used every single penny to buy this house from the bank to save your reputation, because I loved you, and I didn't want the world to know that Marcus Sterling had gambled away his childhood home." Marcus staggered back as if he had been punched. You bought the house?" "I bought the debt," Lindsay corrected, "and Arthur signed the deed over to me as collateral. For 7 years, Marcus, you have been living in my guest room. You have been eating food from my kitchen. You have been sleeping in my bed." She reached into the pocket of her black dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a deed transfer, stamped and notarized. "Arthur has a life estate clause," Lindsay said, gesturing to her father-in-law. "Which means, as long as he lives, this is his home. He stays. He is the master of this house." She turned her gaze to Jessica, who was trying to edge toward the door with her Louis Vuitton bag. "But you," Lindsay said, her voice turning to ice, "and you, Marcus, you have no such clause. You are guests. And as the owner of this property, I am formally revoking your invitation." "You can't do this," Marcus cried, his eyes filling with tears of rage. "I'm your husband." "Not for long," George interjected helpfully. "The divorce papers are in the car. Infidelity is a breach of the prenuptial agreement, specifically Clause 4B regarding public humiliation. You get nothing, Marcus. No alimony, no shares, and certainly no house." Lindsay looked at the red wine stain that was still faintly visible on the carpet where Jessica had spilled it earlier. "You wanted drama, Jessica?" Lindsay asked. "You wanted to reveal who truly runs this family? Well, now you know." Lindsay pointed to the massive oak double doors. "Jenkins," Lindsay said, "please show Mr. Sterling and his +1 the exit. If they are not off the property in 10 minutes, call the police and have them removed for trespassing." "With pleasure, madam," Jenkins said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. He snapped his fingers, and 2 large security guards stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. "Wait, Lindsay!" Marcus fell to his knees, grabbing the hem of her black dress. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pathetic, groveling fear. "Lindsay, baby, please. I have nowhere to go. Volkov is going to kill me if I don't pay him back. I have no money. Please, let me stay. I'll stay in the guest room. I'll sleep in the servants' quarters." Lindsay looked down at the man she had wasted 10 years on. She felt nothing. No love. No hate. Just a profound sense of relief. She pulled her dress from his grip. "You like the garden, don't you, Marcus?" she said. "You should go there. I hear the night-blooming jasmine is out." She turned her back on him and sat down next to Arthur. "Remove them," she commanded. The guards grabbed Marcus by the arms. He screamed and kicked. As they dragged him out of the dining room, Jessica didn't even wait to be grabbed. She sprinted out the door, her heels clacking loudly, not looking back at Marcus once. As the screams faded down the hallway and the front door slammed shut with a final heavy thud, silence returned to the dining room. Arthur let out a long, shaky breath. He reached out and took Lindsay's hand. "I am so sorry," he whispered, "that you had to do that." Lindsay squeezed his hand. She looked around the table at the stunned guests. Mrs. Vandermeer was beaming. Mr. Thorne was nodding in approval. "I think," Lindsay said, picking up her wine glass, "we are ready for dessert now. Jenkins, is the tart ready?" The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was the sweetest sound Lindsay had ever heard. It was heavier than the crystal chandeliers and richer than the vintage wine. For the first time in 10 years, the air in Sterling Manor didn't smell of fear or appeasement. It smelled of rain and justice. The dinner party did not resume as normal, of course. One does not simply eat a lemon tart after a corporate coup and a marital execution. But the atmosphere shifted into something warmer. The board members, realizing that their investments were safe in the hands of the woman who had actually been running the logistics for years, relaxed. Mrs. Vandermeer even toasted Lindsay, calling her the Iron Lady of the Hudson. That night, Lindsay didn't sleep in the guest room. She slept in the master suite. She didn't sleep in Marcus's bed, though. She had the staff strip the linens and move the mattress into the hallway to be burned. She slept on the chaise lounge by the window, watching the sunrise over the estate she had saved, knowing that no one would ever make her feel small again. 3 months later. The fall of Marcus Sterling was not a slow decline. It was a cliff dive. Without the protection of the Sterling name and the legal shield of the company lawyers, the sharks came for him immediately. The Hong Kong deal blew up in spectacular fashion. When Viktor Volkov realized he had paid a premium for a collection of biscuit recipes and redacted weather reports, he didn't sue. Men like Volkov don't sue, they send messages. Marcus was found 2 weeks after the gala, hiding in a cheap motel in Jersey City. He wasn't harmed, but he was terrified. He went voluntarily to the FBI, begging for protective custody in exchange for confessing to the embezzlement. The trial was the talk of the city. Lindsay didn't attend. She was too busy. she was busy sitting in the CEO's office, Arthur's old office, renegotiating the union contracts that Marcus had tried to shred. She was busy launching the new sustainable shipping initiative that she had designed years ago, but Marcus had called too hippie. Arthur, whose health had miraculously improved once the stress of his son was removed, had taken on the role of chairman emeritus. He spent his days in the greenhouse, finally at peace, knowing his legacy was safe. As for Jessica, the love of Marcus's life didn't last the car ride to the train station. The moment the security guards dropped them at the gate, and she realized Marcus's credit cards were already declined, she called an Uber for herself. She testified against him in court to cut a plea deal for her involvement in the shell company. She is currently serving 6 months of community service, picking up trash on the side of the highway, ironically, wearing an orange vest that clashed horribly with her skin tone. 1 year later, it was a crisp autumn afternoon when Lindsay walked out of the towering Sterling shipping headquarters in Manhattan. She was wearing a tailored cream suit, her hair cut into a sharp, chic bob. She looked 10 years younger. She was heading to her car when a ragged figure stepped out from the shadows of the alleyway. He was thin, his face gaunt and unshaven. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been bought at a thrift store. He was holding a cardboard cup of lukewarm coffee. "Lindsay!" She stopped. Her security detail, a burly man named Tiny, stepped forward, but Lindsay held up a hand. She looked at Marcus. He looked like a ghost of the man who had sneered at her dress. "Hello, Marcus," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was indifferent. I heard you just closed the deal with the Navy," Marcus said, his voice raspy. "Congratulations." That was my dream." "It was your dream to sell them out," Lindsay corrected. "It was my plan to serve them." Marcus shifted his weight. "Look, Lindsay, I've done my time. I did 6 months in minimum security. I'm clean now. But no one will hire me. The name is poison." "You poisoned it," she said simply. "I know," he whispered. He looked up at her, tears in his eyes. I need a chance, just a small loan. Or a job. I could work in the mailroom, anything, please. I'm living in a shelter." Lindsay looked at him. She thought about the night of the gala. She thought about Jessica laughing at her. She thought about the wine soaking into her velvet dress. She thought about the 10 years of silence. She reached into her purse. Marcus's eyes lit up with hope. She pulled out a business card. "I can't give you a job at Sterling," Lindsay said. "The board would never allow it. And frankly, neither would I. But," she handed him the card, "this is the number for a recruitment agency that specializes in manual labor for the city sanitation department. It's honest work, Marcus. It builds character, something you've always lacked." Marcus stared at the card. "Garbage. You want me to collect garbage?" "You treated me like garbage for a decade," Lindsay said, signaling her driver to open the door. "Consider it a learning opportunity." She got into the back of her sleek, black town car. As the window rolled up, she saw Marcus standing on the curb, clutching the card, the wind blowing through his thinning hair. She didn't look back as the car pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city she now owned. She picked up her phone and dialed Arthur. "Hi, Arthur," she said, a smile touching her lips. "I'll be home for dinner. And yes, I picked up the ingredients for the biscuits." The mansion was warm, the company was thriving, and the pests had been exterminated. Lindsay Sterling had finally cleaned house. Wow, what a satisfying ending! It just goes to show that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's just the calm before the storm. Lindsay proved that true power isn't about shouting the loudest or wearing the flashiest clothes. It's about knowing your worth and holding the keys to the castle. Marcus and Jessica learned the hard way that when you bite the hand that feeds you, you might just starve. What do you think? Did Marcus deserve a second chance, or was Lindsay right to leave him on the curb? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and sweet justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have plenty more drama coming your way. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.